Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and I'm so pleased you've joined me for today's show. Recently, I was asked to speak at a Toastmasters club called Money Matters, and they wanted to hear my take on how tenants, landlords, and developers look at rental markets, international rental markets, actually. It occurred to me that these folks look at rental markets differently depending on their mindset. Now, of course, their mindset determines which game they're playing. If you're watching this on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, I have a slide deck on this also. So if you're listening to it, know that there's actually slides with this as well. So if you're on YouTube, you'll see the slides. Let me actually share screen and we'll get into the slides so I can show you the rental presentation that I gave the Toastmasters Club recently, which is actually really fun. Okay. Oh, that's the end of it. Let me go to the beginning of it. Here we go. So this is called rental markets, checkers versus chess. And I've got a picture of a checkerboard here with your 15 reds and 15 black pieces. But let me start off with a great quote from Kobe Bryant. These young guys are playing checkers and I'm out there playing chess. And that's the difference. It's a matter of mindset, and then your mindset changes your habits. So here we go. We're going to analyze this, and then we're going to throw some frameworks in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define who those players are, specifically the tenant, the landlord, and the developer. We're going to define the games. What is checkers? What is chess? And then we're going to define the perspective on how these people view the world, view different things. And then we're going to test those perspectives in several scenarios. I'm also going to talk about curveballs that have happened in the past. Obviously, we can't see them in the future, but we can brace for curveballs. But the goal of this presentation is to help you change your perspective. Let's evaluate where you are, what game you're playing, and then how would you change your perspective? All right, let's get into it. Let's define the players. A tenant is someone who is, whoops, I went too far. A tenant is someone who is renting something from a landlord, right? And it can be something, a tenant can be renting a dwelling. That's typically what we're talking about here on My Life as a Landlord, is we're talking about renting a dwelling, but it doesn't have to be. It can be renting a retail space. You can be renting a vacant lot, but a tenant is someone who is renting something, a space of some kind for some purpose, for in exchange for some kind of good. Usually it's money. A landlord is the person that's providing that, right? This is the person that's providing the retail space, providing the dwelling, providing the vacant land, providing the warehouse, whatever it might be. They're the one collecting the goods, typically money. And then the developer. Now, the developer, typically when you think of developer, you might think of downtown Vancouver with big cranes and big massive equipment. But one of the things that a developer is defined is when a government agency has anyone of any kind walk in saying, I want to make an improvement on this land. And it could be a high rise in Vancouver or Toronto or New York or Dallas, whatever. But it could also be a homeowner walking in to say, I want to put up a fence on my property and I would like a building permit for that. In some jurisdictions, you have to have a building permit for a fence. Well, guess what? That government agency is looking at that person as you guessed it, a developer. So you have to really look at what a developer is, but a developer is really anybody who wants to make an improvement on some kind of real property. All right, those are our players. Which player are you? Are you a tenant? Are you a landlord? Are you a developer? Or are you like me? I'm all three. Interesting. But now let's define the games. Let's talk about checkers first. If you remember checkers, you probably played this. It's usually on a white and black checkered board, 15 pieces. Actually, in this one, they have 12, but I think it's 15. And all you can do is you can move diagonally or jump, limited spaces, limited moves, and limited outcomes. Now I'm going to make the jump on why this is important here in a second. But checkers is a very structured game. There's only so many ways that you can win and only so many moves and only so many outcomes. But chess is a different one. If you've played chess before, and chances are you probably have, or at least you've seen it, There is a number of different pieces. Each one moves differently. Each one can capture different moves. Like a pawn can move either one space or two spaces forward, but it can only kill diagonally. But that's the only one that can do like that. But you have a variety of different other pieces that can do different things. And as a result, you have a variety of different outcomes and over 5 million moves. I mean, you've got supercomputers that are analyzing these chess moves. It's pretty incredible. And so you can tell the difference between checkers and chess. If you apply this to real estate, you apply this to life, you've got limited moves, limited outcomes if you are a checker player. If you're a chess player, you've got more moves, you think differently, and you're thinking on a bigger scale because you've got different pieces that you're playing. Okay, we're going to talk more about this in a minute. Financially, which game do you play? Do you play in a game with limited moves and limited outcomes? Or are you a chess player? Let's see. Okay, so what I've done here is I've got the tenant, the landlord, and the developer along one column on the left-hand side, and then I've got a checker player and a chess player. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start defining a checker playing tenant, a chess playing tenant, and same thing for a checker playing landlord, chess playing landlord, checker playing developer, chess playing developer. So we're going to talk about each perspective as we move through this grid. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see as we come up, because I do have a slide deck on this. Okay, if you are a checker playing tenant, which would argue that many tenants are checker players, they are thinking inward. They're thinking right now, survivability. They usually have a JOB or some kind of limited funds that is based on either their earning, their time, but in some way they have limited moves in order to survive, keep a budget, okay? But they're thinking more survival, if that makes sense. A chess playing tenant is different thinking. A chess playing tenant is thinking outward. They're thinking more long term. They're thinking strategically, and they're looking at investing time and money in making their decisions. And they're only renting because they're thinking further down the road. Maybe they're going to move somewhere else. Maybe they don't want to mow lawns, for example. There's people who do that and just say, you know what? I'm only going to be month to month for a while, and I know I'm only going to be in this city for a while. I'm just going to rent, even though they could buy something. They just don't want to do that. But a chess playing tenant and a checker playing tenant look very differently. One is strategic, the chess player is strategic, and the checker player isn't necessarily strategic. But let's talk about the checker playing landlord. The checker playing landlord is also inward perspective, also thinking about now survivability. The checker playing landlord is still someone that has a job. They very likely do not necessarily identify as a landlord. They think they have to do everything themselves. And when they're dealing with their rental or rentals, they are thinking that they have to literally get in the car and go wherever they are. They're usually capital limited, and they're most people who I see inheriting rental portfolios from family members or others that come into this role, they land here. They're the landlord checker player, and they're not really strategic about what they're doing. They're just sort of in shock, right? They're now thinking, they're survival thinking. That's where these folks live. Now, the chess playing landlord, which is what I am, very likely, if you are a seasoned landlord listening to this podcast, you are very likely a chess playing landlord. You're thinking more outward, you're thinking more strategic and forward thinking, and you're thinking more about team playing, the systems. If you have a property manager, you're thinking about involving them and empowering them, checking them. And really, it's about the team. But you're thinking way more long term. You're not thinking, oh my goodness, I just got a trouble call from my tenant. I have to get in my car and go deal with it. No, you're thinking way longer term. So that's the chess playing landlord. Now let's talk about a checker playing developer. A checker playing developer in this aspect is someone, okay, I'm going to back up a second. A developer in this regard is someone who is creating more housing. That's kind of how I've outlined this presentation. And so someone who is actively creating more housing doesn't have a job, isn't working with survivability, they aren't thinking inward. It is all outward, it is all strategic, and it is all planned. And so I'm making the argument in this presentation that there is no checker playing developer. There is no checker playing developer because they're not thinking inward. They're not thinking survival. You can't develop by thinking inward, by thinking survival. So my argument is there are only chess playing developers. And those chess playing developers, again, they are strategic. They're all about empowering the team, their systems, and they are very long-term thinking. They're the ones that are looking at the research, the statistics, all of the different studies, because they have to be very, very mindful of where they are sinking their funds to create more housing, because this is not something where it's not transactional. It's not like walking into Starbucks, you give them some money and they give you a coffee. It's not right now. A developer is going to shell out probably millions of dollars, and the return on that isn't going to happen for probably a couple years at least, right? So they've got to be more forward thinking. So the chess playing developer is got lots of moves, but they're also very strategic in their decision making. So those are the perspectives, okay? And really there's only 5. Okay, let's talk about how each of these people in each game look at rental markets. Okay, and one of the things we're going to talk about is the supply up or down. That is completely geographic. Like, for example, there are parts of San Antonio, parts of Toronto that have been overbuilt in certain layouts, in certain strategic footprints of different kinds of condos, different kinds of housing layouts. There are places that are sitting empty. Why? Because they've been overbuilt, they're overvalued, and the owners cannot either sell or they can't get the market rent to cover the mortgage payment. And so it's very interesting how this works, but the supply of rental markets is very geographic dependent. Cost of living. Cost of living is sort of a crapshoot at this point. Everything seems to be going up. Recently, the avian flu resulted in a lot of price fluctuations in food in general. You may have noticed that there were certain restaurants that were adding a per egg surcharge because of this, but that's not the only thing. Now you've got other things like tariffs, transportation costs. Gas seems to have equaled a little bit, but the cost of living is a question mark. Rent costs. Rent costs are putting the squeeze on renters, but rents typically have to go up to accommodate the property taxes, the insurances. We'll talk about this. So insurance costs are going up. Why is that? Because replacement values are going up. The cost of construction materials are going up. The cost of labor is going up, especially as more skilled trades exit. House values are going up, which means, again, insurance is going to go up, so are property taxes. Utilities are typically going up. And property taxes is interesting. If you're lucky, your property tax rates haven't changed, but because the house values have gone up, your property taxes are likely going to go up as well. But if your taxes have gone up too, you're getting a double whammy. You're getting a higher evaluation at a higher rate. That's fun. Permit red tape. This is one of the things as a developer I see all the time, both in Canada and in Hawaii. It takes a long time to get a permit. And so there's a lot of difficulty in creating new housing or making additions to existing housing. Short-term rentals is always a question mark. We've got several episodes in the podcast about that. Do people house hack? Does your zoning permit you to put in an Airbnb? If you do put in an Airbnb, what about the cost of the turning of the unit, which is cleaning? There's a lot of wear and tear on the units. You typically have to change linens and renovate the units. It's very hard on the unit, but it just depends, right? And it's very team centric. You're going to have to pay a lot to keep your team to turn those units quicker with short-term rentals. But if that's your business model, that's what it is. But it is still part of the rental market. House hacking, room rentals, especially if you have a bit of a boarding house or you have an empty room in your own house, then you've got to rent a room. And that's very confrontational because it's very in your face, right? It's very interesting screening someone to be essentially a roommate. Lack of employees. We've got a generation in the baby boomers who are incredibly skilled, and they have a lot of capital in the form of their retirements typically, that are exiting the workforce with their skills. You've got some folks coming up behind them, and then you've got some folks in the millennials coming up behind them as well, but there's not nearly enough to fill the void as the boomers depart the workforce. So you've got a lack of employees across the board, but you've also got a shortage of skilled trades. So anybody that's in the trades, expect your costs to go up. When you have a trouble call, expect that you're going to have to wait longer for the repairs. And then of course they probably don't have parts that you need in stock. So then you have to order them. I mean, it's tough. I found this article from Harvard University Joint Center for Housing Studies. This was actually the day I presented this, which was April 14, 2025. The title of this is Renters Disproportionately Seek Disaster Assistance for Uninsured Vehicle Damages. I'll read it again. Renters disproportionately seek disaster assistance for uninsured vehicle damages. So what this means is, and it's got a photo of a line of cars, and it's got flood water up to, well, about halfway up the tires or above the tires on most of them. So they're probably going to be flooded cars. And so renters disproportionately seek disaster assistance for uninsured vehicle damage, meaning there are renters who have uninsured vehicles who have a total loss, and then they're seeking help because they don't have insurance. So I ask you, what kind of mindset are these renters in? Are these chess playing renters or these checker playing renters? Because they're uninsured. You guessed it, they're checker playing renters. This was a very interesting study. So let's talk about how the rental markets, how each of these people, the tenant, the landlord, and the developer, and the game that each of them are playing when you're viewing the rental markets. Just what we discussed here, just for a second. So in a checker playing tenant, looking at rent increases, when a landlord can increase the rent based on their geographic tenancy laws, they are probably going to take it personally. They might find despair. They might say, hey, I'm going to have to rent out a room, or I might have to move out. But they're basically going to take it personally. A chess playing tenant, especially in this rental market, is going to potentially weigh this differently. Remember, they're outward thinking, they're more strategic. They're saying, costs are going up. Maybe it's time for me to buy a home, or should I move in with family? But ultimately, they need to evaluate the grief to dollar ratio of the rental, saying, you know what, does this amount of rent, is it worth me moving out for $20 additionally in a month if that's how much you can increase the rent? Some places you can increase the rent to what's called market value, whatever market value is in your geographic area, with no dollar limit. That's how it is in Hawaii. So if you get that kind of thing in your rent increase as a chess playing tenant, and let's say your rent amount goes from $3,000 for a 2-bedroom to $3,500 to a 2-bedroom, is that extra $500 a month enough for you to change your situation? It might be. And by the way, those are market rates for Hawaii rentals on Maui right now. It's about $1,500 to $1,800 per room is typically what rent is running. Okay, the checker playing landlord, they are typically scared. They are typically paralyzed in this kind of thing, in this rental market. They're scared of vacancies. They're scared of bad tenants. They're scared of hiring property managers. They are really concerned, and they turn to Facebook and social media in general when they say, I've got this tenant in there. How do I get them out? And then, of course, once they get them out, how do I get my money? Because typically the tenant has trashed the unit and or left them with unpaid rent, and the deposit won't cover it. This is the checker playing landlord. This is where I see a lot of people going to social media, just basic asking questions out of panic. I see a lot of panic on social media. But let's talk about the chess playing landlord. Again, that's me. That's probably you. I'm thinking, how do I bring better value to the tenants, especially knowing I have to increase their rent? How can we create and empower a better team? How can we be more engaging and be more forward thinking on things like annual maintenance, right? So we've created a lot of checklists for annual maintenance on all the different properties. We're checking things like dryer vents, and there's all kinds of things that we're looking at. And I've done podcast episodes on annual maintenance. So if that's something that interests you, please search the library. All right, the last thing about rental markets. Let's talk about the developer who is trying to create more housing. He's a chess playing, well, he or she is a chess playing developer. And they're going to be looking at the changing laws, changing building codes, and the research. Now, you'll notice I do a lot of nerdy evaluations on my life as a landlord. Why? Because you've got to know what the environment is and what the research is telling you, both historically and the projections ahead. So a chess playing developer asks long-term questions and researches projections. And that's why I go so deep on all this statistical stuff, on all this nerdy stuff. That's why I do that. So there's your layout. There's your 5 perspectives specifically about rental markets. But let's look at a couple other different things just for ho-hos. Now that we've set up this whole framework, let's look at tariffs. How would a checker playing tenant look at the tariffs that are coming? And it could be the tariffs from anywhere. Typically, China is what we're looking at. But honestly, if you're listening to this in Canada, the US has put on tariffs. It's sort of a question mark. So we're not sure. But the checker playing tenant viewing tariffs will see, there's some cost of living increases. They might be concerned about potential layoffs. Remember, their job is, or their income source is their whole thing. And they're thinking, there might be some volatility. They're unsure. The whole market might be noisy. These guys are in survival mode. So keep that in mind. And tariffs, they may not even be thinking about it. But the chess playing tenant, again, is looking at this strategically, going, the cost of living is increases. I might have a concern about rising interest rates. And maybe if they were thinking about building a house or moving, buying a house, they might be concerned about materials or furniture, lumber, things like that, if they are shifting or considering shifting out of their rentals. So they might look at the tariffs just a little bit differently than the checker playing tenant. A checker playing landlord, again, is scared in general, scared of a layoff for their own job, and they're scared looking at the stock market, and the volatility in the stock market is going up and down. They're scared in general. But the chess playing landlord, again, I'm same thing. I'm trying to figure out, how can I bring better value to the tenants? How can I create and empower a better team, knowing what is moving forward? How is it that these tariffs are going to impact? Are we constructing things? Are we strategically adding furnished items that I'm going to have to pay more on furniture coming in? But again, it's way more long-term thinking. Same thing with the developer. A chess playing developer looking at tariffs going, the materials and the import costs, construction materials, affordability for the end product, which is the sales. So let's talk about that for a second. That's a new one. When we're talking about the tariffs coming in, and you've got a developer who's making new housing and the cost of materials is going up, you might be in a force majeure situation, which basically the tariffs have gone up and created a higher cost that's outside of their control. At the end of the day, the bottom line of the cost to build that unit, whether it's condos or subdivision, single family home, tract, whatever, the end product is going to be costing more because the cost of the build was more. So now it's like, okay, well, it costs 10, 20, 30% more or higher to build. And now what about the affordability of the person that's actually going to come in and buy that unit? Is it actually affordable? And this is what the developer is looking at. I guarantee you, this is the kind of stuff we're looking at. This is happening in Toronto already. All right, let's look at one more. Let's see how each of these perspectives looks at a natural disaster. And what I'm talking about here is a natural disaster that impacts their home, actually their home or their rental, or something that is personally impacting them. Okay, so in this instant, for a checker playing tenant, they might have a loss of unit, they might have to relocate, they might have loss of personal items and likely no rental insurance. They might have to move in with a family member, and they could potentially be laid off depending on the infrastructure and depending on the company that they are working at. This is very likely what they're going to go through. It's very traumatic. This is exactly what people in Lahaina and in LA went through. If they are a checker playing tenant, this is very likely what they were thinking. Now, a chess playing tenant is thinking, okay, I've lost the unit. They're going to have to relocate. They've lost their personal items, but if they had rental insurance, then they would have to do a claim. They still may have to move in with family, but they also are looking long-term and strategically, and they might invest in either rebuilding or relocating, right? It's a strategic move. It's not just survivability, it's strategic. A checker playing landlord, again, in general, is scared. So now they're scared of the rental property. They might have an insurance claim. They themselves might have a layoff, depending on the company that they're with. They might have a situation where they have a mortgage payment that's due, but they have no rent to offset. So there's got to be an awkward conversation there with the lender. This is very traumatizing for the checker playing landlord. Okay, so now we've got the chess playing landlord. If you have an insurance claim, you go through an insurance claim. Call your insurance agent, your insurance broker, explain what happened. Call the lender about the loss and say, hey, I've got no revenue coming in. I need to delay the payments. And ultimately go back to your team of your boots on the ground and your advisors, and ask for ideas and say, what's the best way to do this? Go to your city or your municipality and talk to them about the reality of new infrastructure and the timing of rebuilding. Okay? Now let's talk about the chess playing developer. Now, if there's a natural disaster, a chess playing developer typically has quite a bit of equipment. They're going to be mostly concerned, especially in the immediate part, is life and property and helping with equipment, making sure that roads are put back in, infrastructure can be put back in, and really trying to make sure that people are safe and trying to protect life and property. There's very likely going to be an insurance claim, especially if they've had a loss on one of their developments. Again, they're going to be looking at infrastructure. And again, this is the world that they live in, is permits and planning. That's the first thing they're going to say to the municipality or the regional district, whatever they are at, saying, when can we rebuild? When can we move forward? How are we going to do this? Very interesting how each of these looks different based on a disaster, right? Pretty interesting. All right, let's talk about the curveballs here. Now, one of the things during our big build, a ship blocking the Suez Canal for 6 days. Who knew that was going to screw up the world and the location of shipping containers around the world for over a year? That occurred while we were building Paradise Ridge. And it was so bizarre that we had shipping containers that were in the wrong part of the world. Like there was a couple times where we were trying to ship stuff and they're like, well, we have to wait for a shipping container to get here. Like, what are you talking about? So there was like hordes of shipping containers that were empty in different parts of the world. And then there was like deserts where there were no shipping containers because of this. Very strange stuff. So worldwide shipping delay, container shortage. COVID was a very weird curveball. Eviction moratoriums, lockdowns, lots of social awkwardness. Weather, different crop yields, food prices and availability. Also global warming. I mean, there's all kinds of impact when we're talking about climate and weather. And the avian flu, I mentioned early, mass culling, egg prices and availability, that goes all into the cost of living. And just these are just some of the curveballs that have happened in recent memory. There are more, and there are going to be more coming up. And so then it's a question of, how do you protect yourself from a curveball? Well, which perspective are you? That's the question. Are you a tenant, a landlord, a developer, or are you two of those? Are you all three like I am? Which game are you playing? Are you playing checkers or chess? Sometimes you are a tenant and you're a chess playing tenant, but you're also a landlord somewhere else. And maybe you have a job in the middle of all that. I mean, it is possible that you can be different perspectives of different games. And how are you ready for that next curveball based on where you are in your perspective? So here is my effort. This was my goal of the presentation today, was to change your perspective. So this slide here is all about what I can challenge you to do if you are one of these folks, okay? So if you're a checker playing tenant, I highly encourage you to increase the amount of moves you have. And you can do that by a couple ways. You can start a side hustle. If you don't know who Gary Vaynerchuk check out his Gary Vee, on YouTube. He has got tons of stuff on side hustling, on going to a local garage sale, and then taking how to search on eBay for the items in the garage sale. You buy at the garage sale for $1 and then you sell it on eBay or whatever for $5. You just made $4. If you're making $15 or $20 an hour and you can make a couple $100 in a weekend doing something that's kind of interesting on a side hustle, that might be entertaining and it could open some doors for you. You could feel better about your cost of living. The other thing that you can do is you can play the game Cash Flow. Now, this is a board game that Rich Dad Poor Dad Robert Kiyosaki has put out, and we have played it probably 1,000 times, no kidding. And it's a board game that is very notes intensive. It makes you think about money in a different way. It forces you to think about budgeting. So if you've never played Cash Flow, I cannot recommend this enough. There is actually an online version. You can get the app and you can play it on your phone. Not quite as tactile, right? When you're actually with a pencil and the cash flow card and your calculators. It is very interesting, but it's not something that you're going to play in an hour. It's more like 3 or 4 hours. It's pretty interesting. So that's, as a checker player, you can either start a hot side hustle or you start playing Cash Flow. If you are a chess playing tenant, I challenge you to think longer term. Now, I had Freddie Rapina on the show a ways back, and he has a book called Playing the Wealth Game, and it's all about chess versus checkers. I encourage you, this is an eye-opening book. I encourage you to go back and look at that episode that's in the library. Freddie Rapina. If you're a checker playing landlord, then you need to set up some systems. Again, a checker playing landlord has limited moves and limited outcomes. You need to set up more systems. And I would recommend you do that by reading Michael Gerber's E-Myth series. Now, he has several flavors of the E-Myth series, whether it's real estate or, I mean, there's just a ton of them. Pick one. They all have the same structure where you start at a technician, then you become a manager, and then you become an entrepreneur. But get into that. Stop being the technician, because that's where a checker playing landlord is. And I encourage you to think bigger. As a chess playing landlord, the biggest thing is define what you want. What is it that you actually want? And the biggest thing I can say is read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Michael and I met and got married because of this book. It's pretty interesting, but this is stereo instructions to get and to manifest it. And the hardest part is figuring out exactly what you want. And as the chess playing developer, you want to delegate and to prepare. And I highly encourage you to read Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time. This is one of the hardest things that anybody is going to do, especially as a chess player, because you're going to hit that glass ceiling. I've hit it myself, where you have to buy back your time, but how do you actually do that? Well, Dan Martell gives you the secret of all this. And quite frankly, you hire an assistant, and what do they do for you? They own and manage your calendar and your emails. Oh my gosh, that just gives me anxiety. I'm about to do this, so I will let you know how it goes for me. But if you are stuck in your chess playing world and you need more help, or you feel like you're overwhelmed and drowning, please get Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time and read it. Okay, here's the conclusion. We define the players and the games. We define the perspective, and then we tested the perspectives in many scenarios. We talked about the curveballs, and I hope along the way, I changed your perspective. All right, there's my ticker for my life as a landlord. And I'm gonna stop sharing. And I wanna say thank you very much for allowing me to explain this. And again, if you did not watch the slide deck on YouTube at My Life as a Landlord, please do that. Just as a reminder, I am recording this episode on Maui, Hawaii. Why? Because real estate takes you places, and where do you want real estate to take you? Join me next week for episode 139, where Alex Thorrick's podcast called BIT Academy has had me on as a guest with an episode called The #1 Mistake Real Estate Investors Make and How to Avoid It. I will see you there.